This lecture is on the integumentary system. To start with a little overview of the integumentary system, which consists of skin, hair, and nails, and we'll take a look at each of these features. The integumentary system has various functions. Number one, it protects from disease, pathogens. Number two, it helps to retain body fluids. And number three, it helps to eliminate wastes, such as wastes that are eliminated through sweat. And for this reason, the integumentary system is sometimes included in the category as an excretory system, or an organ system that excretes products that we no longer need. Let's start by looking at the anatomy of the skin. The skin is in two layers. We'll draw a picture of it here. Kind of looks like a slice of cake, this picture. And top layer is known as the epidermis. And the middle layer, which is the largest layer and has the most different features, is the dermis. And then you have the hypodermis, which is not really a layer of skin. It's really a layer under the skin. And so sometimes you see textbooks just talk about the epidermis and the dermis. But I think the subcutaneous layer is pretty important to talk about, so we will talk about it in this lecture. Okay, so let's start by talking about the epidermis. Okay, so the epidermis, let's draw another little picture of it so we can, this is the outer layer of skin, and it is an epithelial tissue, which is a lining. And we've already talked about epithelial tissues, which make up the linings of organs. And the epidermis is stratified, which means it is layered. And the cells are found in layers. These cells continuously divide from the deepest layer, and they push the outer layers towards the surface. And then the outer layers slough off, or die and slough off, as new cells are produced from underneath. The epidermis has a lot of a protein called keratin in it. This is inside the epidermal cells, and it provides a toughness to the skin, and it's a protective type protein, giving the skin a leathery quality and also waterproofing the skin. Another molecule that you have in the skin is called melanin. This is a brown pigment. We all have this brown pigment in our skin, but some of us have more of the brown pigment than others. This is a protective pigment, and it is protective because it absorbs UV light and protects skin against skin cancer. And so the more melanin a person has, the more protected they are against skin cancer. And so people who have very fair skin have to be concerned about staying out in the sun for too long. Then I guess it's also important in this context to mention albinos, which are people who, or let's say animals that have none of this brown pigment. And so albinos usually also have red eyes because they also have no pigment in their eyes. And what you're seeing when you look into their eyes is you're seeing the red from the blood vessels in the interior of the eye. And then the dermis is the inner layer. just underneath the epidermis. It's the largest layer, has the greatest diversity of tissues and cells in the epidermis, or the dermis, excuse me. Let's draw the dermis. So there's the epidermis again. And now we're looking at the layer just underneath, which is the dermis. Okay, so the dermis has a variety of structures in it. I'm trying to draw a hair follicle with a hair and its connection to blood vessels at the base of the hair follicle. We'll color in the hair. And then the hair is fed by these blood vessels. Those will be little arterioles. And we have the venules, the small veins that permeate the dermis. So if you cut yourself and the cut extends down into the dermis, that is when you will bleed. If you cut yourself and the cut only goes into the epidermis, then you will not bleed. And then you have the dermal papilla, which feeds the blood vessels, feeds the hair follicle with blood vessels so that the hair can grow. It is the mitoses in the dermal papilla that push off cells that die, and then the hair itself is made of keratin that is left over from the dead cells. So the hair, which is keratin, is actually also composed of dead cells. And the hair is the color, usually reflects the color of the person's skin, because the hair will then contain varying amounts of melanin. Okay, and then here we have the sensory neurons. And the sensory neurons have endings, these nerve endings. And so sensory neurons are going to be allowing you to feel sensations from your skin, such as touch, light touch, or deep pressure, or hot and cold. And then you have these sweat glands, which are linked to the outside of the body and are producing sweat, which are going to protect you from overheating, to cool the body. And then also let's go back to the hair follicle, which I'm drawing in green, although they're not really green, these oil glands. And so the oil glands are going to secrete oil known as sebum. We'll talk about these a little bit later. And that oil is going to coat the hair and protect the hair. And those oil glands sometimes get clogged up and can lead to pimples. So the dermal layer also consists of these muscles that are attached to each hair follicle. And so in addition to the oil glands that are attached to the hair follicle, you have these muscles which are called erector pili muscles. And each hair follicle has an erector pili muscle. And so when you're cold, your muscles contract, and muscle contraction generates heat. And so when the erector pili muscles contract, they're actually going to pull on the hair follicle. And when they pull on the hair follicle, the hair will stand up. When we had more hair, this is thought to have caused all the hairs to stand up on the body. And of course, that will then lead to greater warmth. But now in areas of our body where we have little hair follicles that don't really have very thick hairs, what we end up seeing are goosebumps. And so it is the erector pili muscles that are responsible for goosebumps. Okay, let's look at the hypodermis. Okay, and the hypodermis is the layer that is just underneath the dermis, the one that is sometimes called the subcutaneous layer, that I said many textbooks don't consider it part of the skin, okay, sort of under the skin. And so because hypo means under and dermis is the dermal layer of the skin, or dermis is skin. So I'm drawing a little hypodermis that is under the dermis in this picture. And the hypodermis has larger blood vessels that are obviously going to feed into the blood vessels of the dermis. And so if you cut yourself and the cut goes all the way down into the hypodermis, then you will bleed a lot more than if you just cut yourself as, deep into the dermis. And the hypodermis also contains a lot of these yellow cells that I'm drawing. Okay, these are fat cells. So here we have the hypodermis and some labeling, the large blood vessels, and also these fat cells which make up adipose tissue. Okay, so adipose tissue contains fat, and this is a part of our body where we store fat, and it helps to protect us from cold. Let's talk next about nails. And so first we'll draw a picture of a nail. The nails are going to protect fingers and toes. And the nail consists of a nail body, and then attempt to draw the inside of the nail, or inside of the finger. So the nail consists of a nail body, which is the nail itself, and is made up largely of keratin, and the lunula, which is an area of mitosis. You might notice the lunula on your finger on your nail because it is a white sort of half moon, hence its name lunula. If you don't have it, don't worry, it doesn't mean anything if you're not seeing the lunula on your fingernails. And then the nail grows from a nail root, which is an area where there is active mitosis, pushing the nail out. And then, of course, you have the bone, or the phalanx, which is the finger bone that is going through the finger. Just to list some details about nails, they're composed of keratin, mainly, just like hair, and they continue to grow throughout life at approximately 1 millimeter per week. And the nail is going to form by mitosis, the division of cells from the hair or the nail root, and then the nail will grow longer as the root cells divide. And finally, let's talk about glands. Okay, so we said that there are glands in the skin, and these are called exocrine glands. Okay, so exocrine, exo means outside, and these are glands that release secretions via ducts, and not necessarily to the outside of the body, okay, but to the outside of the gland. In the case of skin, the exocrine glands are releasing secretions to the outside of the body. And so let's just draw a picture of a gland here so that we can see what the duct is. The duct is this tube that leads to the outside of the gland. So the side of the gland is lined with cells, and these are secretory cells, meaning they make various products depending on what the function of the gland is going to be. Okay, so let's just say we'll make some sweat going out here. and then you can see the duct, which is the part of the gland that the sweat is released from. Okay, so just examples of some glands, some exocrine glands. Number one, we've talked about sweat glands. Okay, sweat glands, they secrete sweat, which is composed of basically waste products and salt. And this will regulate body temperature. So you're producing fluid to the outside of your body, and that cools the skin. And keep in mind that it's important to wear clothing that allows that sweat to evaporate from your skin. If you're wearing clothing that is going to trap the sweat against the skin, that's not actually going to cool down your body that much, because the sweat will just come up to body temperature and actually warm you. So it's important to wear these fabrics that allow the sweat to evaporate. And so what kinds of sweat do we have? Well, one kind of sweat we have is from working out. And another kind of sweat we're all familiar with is kind of a stinky sweat from nerves. And that's because that sweat produces products that attract bacteria. And another kind of exocrine gland we're all familiar with are these oil glands that are heading out to the surface of the skin that secrete sebum, which is made of fat. Okay, and this can be good for the skin and hair because it coats the skin and hair and protects it from drying out. And so protects against water loss. But we're also familiar with how these oil glands, we noticed them, by the way, that they were attached to hair follicles, but they may clog because these particular type of gland actually produces not just sebum. Well, it's sebum, but it contains fat, but it also contains cell fragments that can clog up the pores of your hair follicles and lead to pimples. And then sometimes these pimples can become infected, and people have a greater or lesser tendency to get pimples and acne, which is pimples that are forming all over the face and also can become infected. And the tendency to form pimples is basically genetic. We used to think that it was because you were eating the wrong foods like chocolate and French fries, you would get more pimples. But now it's thought that the predisposition to getting pimples is genetic. And I think we will end our lecture on the integumentary system here.